All right, so I'm Paul DiPasquale, and happy to be talking about sculpture.
My first question is, how did you first get involved in art, and sculpture in particular?
Let's see. Well, I think everybody is involved in art to various levels, whether they know it or not. It's really what we do as creative beings. Having free choice, that's what we are. But I gave myself permission to do it in college when I was at UVA and discovered they had a sculpture department. So that was the beginning of that. No, you might want to open the door and let the little barky dog in so it doesn't interrupt us.
So how do you come up with the ideas for your sculptures?
I guess they typically have a purpose of one form or another, and but really there are three categories that Lisa, relax. Sorry, my dog. So on a personal level, there are themes of inspiration that come up for any number of possibilities. The ducks that you saw that are on the ceiling literally came from just the concept of transformation, and here's a ceiling that gets transformed into a water surface, and trying to look at other beings or creatures' worlds from their point of view. And then it became whimsical. So that's a simple example, but something like the Ash Monument was really trying to acknowledge a man who in his hometown had largely, from my perspective, largely been ignored, and here he is loved by the world. So it was deserved, and I felt that as an artist I could be a messenger. Same thing with the Indian. I felt like in the capital of America there ought to be a monument to a Native American, and that's how that began. So nobody hired me to do it, but then that's the third category, which is when I do get hired, and in that case I try to find something to love about the project so that I can put enough passion into it that it makes it a little bit more like art and a little less like a graphic.
So describe the process you go through from when you have an idea through finished product.
Always it's a question of what's the best material to present the concept. So currently the glass pieces are trying to use the properties of glass, which is a presentation of light and color in a translucent material. The same sculpture in bronze doesn't look as good. So bronze, on the other hand, the purpose of that is to last indefinitely, whereas something in wood has more of a warm feel to it, or for that matter, plastic. I mean, some of my things end up in plastic because it's lightweight, it's cheaper, and it gets the idea across. It doesn't need to be where something like this violin head I was telling you about earlier, this being the model for it, but this made out of wood, it's just a lot more fun to have this little bald head than if he had hair, or for me. Anyway, I talked the client into being bald, and in wood it works better than in plastic or in glass for a violin anyway.
How do you decide the position or action of your subjects? Like Neptune, how did you want his hand on a turtle?
Well, it's been pointed out to me that a lot of my sculptures are just half a sculpture. So in the Ash Monument, the children are half children. The Indians, less than half of an Indian. The ducks are half ducks. Neptune's half Neptune. The fact is, I feel like you don't need more than that amount of information. So with Neptune, for instance, they wanted a 15-foot statue of Neptune, and I made him 15 feet from the waist up. Everybody else, the other 50 people who wanted to get the job, made him 15 feet from the feet to the head. So my statue was 3 times the volume of anybody else's, and I did that on purpose because he's on the ocean and he needs to be big to carry the space. Once you have him from the waist up, it's like everything from the waist down is the water world, or the dolphins, the octopus, the fish, the turtle defines that. And then everything from the waist up was our world. And he has to have a spear or a trident. And so the other hand was free, and it was like, well, the turtle's kind of like a Labrador, and you're going, down boy. You know? And he's a sentinel. He's watching, and that's how it, and so thinking that process through, the keeper of the seas was the sentinel idea. It became easy to just, and I had an assistant at the time who said, well, what about a turtle? And she did a drawing, this beautiful drawing of Neptune holding this turtle, and it was like, that's it, that's what I want to do. So.
Cool. Do you, why do you work on such a large scale? You described the volume, or do you prefer large scale works or the small pieces?
Well, right now I prefer the small ones because I'm just tired of hauling around all the big stuff. But the big ones are sexy because they are about fantasy in the same way that you go to a movie. And the difference between going to a movie and watching a 20-foot figure on a screen as opposed to being in your house and watching it on a little screen. So it's falling into the seduction of big and that reality. You're brought into that reality. And for me, sculpture is really about the proximity, the feeling of space around something. And if it's something little like this, there's an intimacy about it, about, you know, you get close to look at it or something. But if it's big, there's an intimidation involved as well, and you may not want to get that close to it, or need to. Or, in the case of a monument, it just presents the information better from a distance.
What is the biggest challenge you face in your work with sculpture?
Ideas are easy. It's the doing it, and people's priorities are so, in my opinion, screwy when it comes to what we get to put in front of us in public. I mean, primarily traffic lights, bridges, shopping malls are what we pay to have in front of us that are structures. Buildings, certainly, but buildings are in a different category. So if you think about, and traffic lights have a use, so maybe they're a craft, but just to give you an idea of money expenditure, if you have two lanes going this way and 2 lanes going that way, like say Broad and Belvedere, to put a traffic light in that intersection costs $600,000. The Arthur Ashe Monument cost $400,000. And we've got lots of intersections like that all over the city. And we think nothing of putting in another intersection, you know, or replacing them. And yet, the Arthur Ashe Monument is something that, and the other monuments on Monument Avenue, make Richmond. What is there to look at? You know, well, you got to go see Monument Avenue. You know, I mean, it made the buildings on Monument Avenue. You know, the Indian cost me about $20,000 to build, and yet it holds a place for Native Americans that tells a story, and I think in its new site will increasingly have a purpose for Richmond that's way beyond what it was as the Brave, you know. But it was useful as the Brave and liked by people who never went to a baseball game. So.
What is your favorite piece you've ever done?
It's hard to answer that because it always goes back to what I've been working on most recently, and in this case I just moved the Indian, and I was really impressed with what a good job I did making it after taking it apart 25 years later, you know. But I have to say the most moving sculpture was the Ashe Monument, getting to work with his wife, having met him and writing him and talking to him about the message he wanted to present, which was books are the most important source of power and knowledge and accomplishment. in the world, or how to accomplish things in the world, and that children should be involved. I mean, those two things were exactly what he wanted in the piece, and then following it through with his wife and his family, and then watching how it's changed in Richmond over the past 14 years now, how it's affected the city and Monument Avenue.
Mm-hmm. Who are your greatest artistic influences?
My favorite modern artist is Jean-Claude Christo, who's known for, people will say, well, he wraps buildings or wraps things. He wouldn't say that. He would say he uses fabric to transform the environment. And I think, at least I've heard them as a couple bristle at saying they wrap things, but he does wrap some things. But I've been fortunate to have a personal relationship with him and gotten invited to things just because 32 years ago I went to a lecture when he was at the Hirshhorn, and I sat next to the two reserved seats up front because I figured they were going to sit there, and I got to talk to him before he was introduced, and sent him a postcard, and he sent me back a signed poster, and then I sent him a sculpture, and he sent me a book, and then I got invited to things whenever he was in D.C. and in Richmond and in New York since. But I greatly admire the temporary nature of his work, and the fact that it's all proactive. He's not accepting any money from government or other sources, and the beauty of his work. I just think it's very much an individual vision. So although our work's quite different, I feel like the process is one that is similar, and he's inspired that. I mean, raising my own money to pay for the Indian by selling prints, for instance. I peeled right off of what he was doing.
Okay. And my last question, do you have any advice for aspiring artists?
Well, I do, in as much as I think that really what we're doing here on the earth is selling our time. And we have to do that because we need to make money in order to continue to do whatever it is we're doing. So I do think that as human beings we're creatives, and as such we owe it to ourselves to create or to spend our time selling our time doing things we want to do and that we deem as necessary or useful. So the art of law, the art of medicine, the art of being a good teller at a bank, if that's what you really like doing, handling money, do it, you know. But when it comes to art, it's a question of finding your own vision and then trying to express it as well as you can. So I think writing and drawing are very similar in that regard. You can overdo it, you can underdo it, you cannot do it well enough. But when you do it right, it makes a difference.
Well, thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure.